Only one more whipping up miracle to go. Sadly, I should make these longer series than just 4 weeks. And there's 37 miracles in the New Testament alone that Jesus did. And we add all the other ones from the Old Testament. We could do an entire year on whipping up miracles. Although I don't know that I would have enough food dishes to present on the screen, so maybe not. But we will do one more whipping up miracles. So far we've had oil, we've had water, we've had fish. Today's going to be our last one, which ironically is the first one mentioned in the Bible, in the New Testament, the first miracle of Jesus. And then after we end this series, we are going to start right into, next week, a series called The Approaching Savior, which I told you about last week. 3 different men from the Old Testament who do some foreshadowing to give us a revelation of an aspect of Jesus' life and his purpose and his duty and the things that they reflect in what he will do eventually, that there's a mirrored image there. So we have the approaching Savior that will lead us straight up to our Easter Sunday. But we need to wash it down with the current miracle. This is a drink miracle, and it is a celebratory one. Speaking of celebrations, last night was prom. I brought one picture with me. I kept it at a distance so that no one would get offended if they thought their hair looked wrong or something in the picture. It was at Great American Ballpark. Batavia's prom was at Great American this year, which is a really cool location. I actually wanted to bring a picture from my own prom when I was in high school because I went in a group of 6 people, and it was 3 guys and 3 girls, and one of the girls became the future Mrs. Nathan DeRico, so it would have been kind of cool to see her up on the screen as well, like there was a connection there. But pictures when I was in school weren't as big a deal as they are now. Like, I think there are some people that are like hiring professional photographers for photo sessions for these proms, like to go to certain locations and get something really cool. Us, we wouldn't be able to hold it anywhere. The camera that it would have taken to take those pictures, you wouldn't be able to keep it in a pocket with you, and you would end up losing it. And your best pictures would end up coming at the end of the prom. Like, you would go back to someone's house and be like, hey, we got a camera, let's take a picture. But then nobody would want those pictures, right? Because you would look disgusting. Everybody gets the pictures at the beginning, right? Your pictures happen before you've eaten, so you don't get any spaghetti sauce stains on your dress, and before you've danced, so your hair is the way it's supposed to be and not all disheveled, and your jacket's not all messed up in whichever way it goes from dancing crazily. All the prom pictures happen at the very beginning. Am I right? You want to look your absolute best, and you want to document it and say, look, this was my prom, even though it's just the pictures before you've done anything. I asked Nora if she had pictures from, like, actually in Great American Ballpark, because I want to see it. I wasn't there. She doesn't have anything from that. So this is prom. This picture right here, this is what I will remember as her prom for this year. But that same concept of getting the pictures before and having everything front-loaded, like the best of the best at the very front, that takes us right into the theme of our final miracle, which I'm hoping by this point you know which one it is. It is about wine, and it comes from John chapter 2. On the 3rd day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best until now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed him. Everyone brings out the best wine first, and then the cheaper after everybody's had too much. Everybody takes the best pictures when you look your best before the prom has happened. This miracle, being the first one, is only recorded in the book of John. And John doesn't even call it a miracle. John calls it a sign. Why does John call it a sign and not a miracle? Well, to answer that, you have to know what makes John different. See, we have 4 Gospels, right? We have Matthew, we have Mark, we have Luke, and we have John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all really, really jive together. They follow a lot of the same chronology and a lot of the same stories, and a lot of things are parallel between at least 2 of the 3 most of the time. But John is just kind of the outside of that in his own little world of fun relevance and interpretation. The first 3 are what we call the Synoptic Gospels. There's too many words that have SY in the beginning of them. Synoptic Gospels. This diagram kind of shows you the Venn diagram part of like which parts are in one, not the other, or which ones they share together. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have a lot of similarities in big chunks, but John is totally different. It doesn't sync up with the other Gospels the same way. And it's like trying to tell a story where you just have the points of the story, like just the narrative points of the story, versus telling a story that has interpretive meaning beyond the points of the story. That's the difference between the Synoptic Gospels and John. Like, if I told you a story where a man is walking down the street and it's a windy day, and he's in a big group of people, and the wind is blowing really hard. Like, I've given you this setting of where he's at and what's happening. That's just the narrative story. But if I give you the detail to say that he looks up and sees a bunch of American flags blowing really hard in the wind, to know that those flags are what are windy, and there's the connection of the wind there, you will understand later, when you realize that this is part of a 4th of July parade, that there are these interpretive signs that there's American flags involved. You're adding an element to it that gives it more meaning and purpose. That's what John would do compared to what Matthew, Mark, and Luke would do. It's a narrative story arc versus a symbolic or a foreshadowing story. So John tells us stories in a way where we can look back and be like, yeah, okay, that part and that part and that part, those make sense, those fall together, those make the bigger picture really make total sense for me. And he'll include points that have a deeper meaning, much like what we're doing with this series with Whipping Up Miracles, and he allows us to see it from his angle, from his lens, his view. You don't have to look farther than the first chapter of any of the Gospels, really, sometimes the second, to see the differences between Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. How do the other Gospels start? Let's look at Matthew first. Matthew starts with a genealogy. The first 17 verses of Matthew are the story of who it takes to get from who to who to who all the way to Jesus. And then in verse 18, he begins his narrative. This is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. So yes, there's deep concepts in there, but it is still very much literal, chronological narrative. The facts of the story are there. This happened, this happened, this happened. Mark and Luke both begin with the legacy of John the Baptist in one way or another, and talking about how he paves the way for Jesus in the beginning of his ministry and the events that lead up to his birth or his baptism. And either way, they're still talking about straightforward narrative stories. Mark chapter 1. At that time, Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee was baptized by John in the Jordan. Just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw heaven being torn open and a spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my son, whom I love, with whom I am well pleased." Yes, it's a big concept. It's a very difficult thing to grasp for us right now, but it is still a literal narrative of the thing that happened. Luke 2 is even more straightforward. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, to the town of David. I know it's not Christmas, but we got to tell the story. Because he belonged to the house in the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. Factual event, factual event, factual event, factual event. And then there's the Gospel of John. John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Skip to verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. That requires you to see the bigger scope, to see the broad picture, and to understand where he's coming from. You can't just read that for the first time and make total sense of it. You've got to be looking at it, as John does, from a perspective of someone who has been dwelling on it for years and really thinking about the meaning of where this comes from. All that time that he spent with Jesus, interacting with him day in and day out and hearing him talk about these things that seemed cryptic at the time, but then to realize later, that's what he meant. That's why he said that. That's how it all connected. That's what John gives us. He puts those little points and extra beats into the story. He makes details inside of details tell a narrative that allows us to see that deeper meaning of why the story mattered. So what are narrative beats in a story? What makes a story a story? Every story that's ever been told has certain elements in it. It has characters. It has a setting. It has conflict. It has climax. It has resolution. Every story has that. Here's just, I asked ChatGPT to give me a story. I said, write one paragraph giving me a story that has those 5 things. On a stormy night in a small coastal village, a young fisherman named Leo discovered that his boat had broken loose and was drifting toward the jagged rocks. Desperate to save his only means of livelihood, he raced through the rain and dove into the raging sea, battling the waves to reach his vessel. Just as the boat began to splinter against the rocks, there's your climax, Leo managed to climb aboard and steer it to safety, though his hands were torn and frozen. And in the resolution, exhausted but triumphant, he returned to shore where the village gathered to help repair his boat. And Leo realized that he wasn't alone. His community will always stand by him in times of need. We had a setting, we had characters, we had conflict, we have resolution through that climax. If John had written this story, he would have mentioned little observations in the boat of like the guy down the street who left his tools on the boat, or the scratching on the side that was left by another boat that had gone past him, so that you have that tie back to know later that all of the people in this village are going to help him. John would see that whole picture to say, I know how this is going to end, and we're going to have the whole story that all of the community is going to gather around this Leo guy, and we're going to make it right. That's the kind of thing that John does. So let's apply that formula to this miracle account that we just had. Because it can be. We have all the same parts. What are the characters in the story? We have Jesus. We have the disciples. We have his mother, wedding guests. What's the setting? It's a wedding. Where's it at? Remember the town? Cana in Galilee, which is on the west side of the sea. And this is an Israelite region. There's a conflict. What's the conflict? They're out of wine. That's an obvious conflict. They come right out and say it. The mother says there's no more wine. Which, that conflict, the result will cause shame for the groom and his family, because they're the ones that are responsible for keeping this party going. It's their job to maintain the level of celebration that happens at a wedding of this time. Climax. Jesus is going to use his resources, the things that he has available to him, at this party to physically transform one liquid substance into another. That is the moment when this entire thing becomes a miracle. And then the resolution, the master of this banquet goes and talks to the groom and praises him for bringing this great wine out later in the festivities. And then everyone that was there that intimately knew Jesus starts to believe and realize who he is. And while any of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, or Luke, could have recorded this event with their own details, or these specific details, John gives us those beats within beats. He doesn't just tell that narrative. He mentions some other things in the middle there that you could take out from the story and it would still be this story. There are things that I didn't even mention when we just rephrased this that John adds so that we can get that big picture, that full recipe that shows us the thing that we're cooking up today that you really can't tell until you put it all together and mix it apart, and mix it up. John gives us the beats within the beats, and the first one is this. He tells us this is the third day. We don't need to know that it's the third day, but John tells us on the third day this is happening. And while, yes, in a normal story it helps to tell you how much time has passed, if you say what day it is, it will typically help with the portrayal of a character by letting you know how long they've been working at something. It also helps to define a setting where the time of day or there's an indication of the lateness of the hour. Those are reasons for saying the third day. All those things could fit into this, but they can be really omitted from this water to wine story because that's not how this gets implemented. Some could argue that he's saying the third day because that's how John has picked up the rest of these stories. Like if you were to go back and look at John 1, verse 35 says the next day John was there again with two of his disciples. And then a few verses later, the next day Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." That John may be telling us, well, this is how the week has gone. The next day, 2 days later, 3 days later. Could be. Maybe he is just documenting the order of the events through the week. Or maybe he's referring to the day of the wedding week, because most of these weddings traditionally went for a solid week. Around the third day of this, you might be looking to find new things to supply. You may not have enough of the top shelf wine that you had on day one, that by day 3, the family might be starting to worry about how is this going to keep being supplied? Is it falling apart? Where is our drinks coming from? That is possible too. But if you look specifically in the verse, it says, on the third day a wedding took place. In that verse, the words that were translated took place is a Greek word ginomai, which literally translates took place, become, happen. Like it's in this moment, the wedding is beginning, it's becoming. On the third day, at this point, here's your wedding. And then in verse 3, the wine is specifically recorded as running out. So John didn't need to say, for you to imply, oh, it's the third day, I bet it's running out. We specifically have the message that the wine has been running out. John adds, immediately after this, Jesus' response to his mother, "My hour has not yet come." For him to put this into it takes it just farther away from being about a literal time and a narrative of how many days have passed. This is more about Jesus' timing and Jesus' place here. So if you read it through John's lens, if you read it through the eyes of a person who knows ultimately what Jesus will do, we have Jesus revealing his kairos, his opportunity, his time. The thing that Jesus responds to them all the time, when this isn't totally quite right, this is not my kairos, it's not my time, my hour has not yet come. We can see that there is much more to this that involves fulfillment of purpose, fulfillment on a cross. John 7, starting verse 6, therefore Jesus told them, "My time is not yet here. For you any time will do. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that its works are evil. You go to the festival. I am not going up to this festival because my time has not yet fully come. My kairos is not now." After he said this, he stayed in Galilee. Everything for Jesus is about the ultimate timing and not about the time of day or the day of the week. It's about whether or not it's the moment when he begins fulfilling this purpose. Jesus is not addressing the issue that his mother raises solely because he thinks that the guests need more wine pronto. This is not like, he's not the caterer, he's not the one that wants to take it upon himself to make sure that they all have drinks. As an invited guest, though, he's close enough to the family to be invited that he wants it to go well. He wants it to go off without a hitch. He wants them to have wonderful things and to have an honorable and respectable celebration. They don't want shame. Jesus doesn't want his friends to be disgraced because of a lack of supplies. But he also knows full well that there's a lesson to be taught, that there are things that he's trying to convey in his own way, in a very subtle way, for the people who are listening to him to learn. This is probably why he addresses his mother the way he does. In the verse, which verse was it, 3? I'm going to look back. Yeah. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." And then he responds, "Woman, why do you involve me?" Which kind of sounds harsh, the way, like when we read it in English, like, "Woman, why are you involving me?" But that is not at all what he's trying to do. And he doesn't say, "What's up, Mom?" He refers to her as a woman because he's trying to convey that in this moment, that's not the relationship that exists between them. That yes, by title, she is his mother and will always be his mother, but by his purpose and by his nature, he needs her to treat him as someone else. It is not degrading in any way. He refers to Mary Magdalene and the Samaritan woman in the same way in other scriptures. He needs her to just understand, right now we're not mother and son. This is not the title for us. My nature right now is to become who I'm becoming. So then she immediately flips a switch, and she gets this understanding that this is beginning to happen. And she turns to the servants, and she places authority in Jesus' hands as the one who's going to be the fixer of the problem, as the leader that the others should look to. She flips that switch from mother to this man is the one that will fix it. This is the man that's going to make it happen. She knew there was going to be a time that it would happen. She has grown up with this understanding that ultimately my son is going to do these amazing things. I'm just waiting for him to tell me when the time is. He's starting on that road, and the path begins at this time as the game starts to unfold. The next ingredient in this complex dish is the reference to the stone jars. We had to have a container. We can't just have the water floating. That would draw way too much attention if they're just orbs of water that all of a sudden turned into wine. But we didn't have to have the description that they were stone jars that were part of a ritual ceremony, that you would use clay jars for very typical common things that would become tainted and dirty and unclean. In Jewish custom, you could not use clay jars for something ceremonial. Stone jars would not get that corruption to them. They were the ones that were used for ceremonial washing and for cleansings, ritual cleansings. And for John to give us this material and explain this to us is for him to help us understand that this is the beginning of Jesus becoming a revolution, and for us to follow and trust in him. That the old Jewish rituals, the things that these stone jars represent, what they're commonly used for, this is no longer going to be our reality. It's not going to be our future from this point on. Like ceremonial washings, ritual cleansings that the Jewish people held on to and their customs, their traditions, a brand new way is about to be poured out on you. New wine is being drawn out of an old vessel. Mark 2. No one pours new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins. With this first miracle, Jesus is proclaiming very privately to intimate groups of friends and family that are very close to him that there is a new way. There is something vibrant and new and satisfying and fulfilling, full of joy, where once there was emptiness or loss or a need to redo all the time and to start over, those old methods are stale. They become ruined. There is something new that is being poured out. There is a new drink being poured out for all of them. All the grumbling for something better, all the need for something tastier, more satisfying, all of those things, whether they realize it or not, are resourced in Jesus. And they are given as a new way for new life. The servants that were there got to be the ones to share this with the master. They're the ones that take it from unfulfilled and disappointing to satisfied and fulfilled. It went through the servants. And that's the final part that John adds into this when he says specifically that the servants knew the source. The master of the banquet that was given these jars has no idea where this came from, where this water that becomes wine, where did it come from, but the servants knew. The humblest of humble in this banquet, the ones who were there just to work, were the ones that got to be told and shown how this miracle was going to take place. It was the most humble level, the workers of the event, who were privy to the secret. And they were tasked with serving the drink. They made it available to everyone at the party, and they would be the ones to understand the power of the man who made the drink possible. And when we pour all of those ingredients together, we see that this indeed was another miracle that is more than just surface deep. It's more than a bummer of a party that gets a boost. Far more profound than just a man being spared the humiliation of not stocking enough supplies in an event. The point of this message is that something greater was offered to those who were willing to serve. And something new was available because the right person was invited to the party. New life can happen if we extend the invitation. Give Jesus the authority as a humble servant to change your situation. Invite him to your party and allow those old ways to be transformed. Because he's inviting you to invite him. Matthew 7, we're going to end with this. And you know it. We all know it. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And the one who knocks, the door will be open.